Some of my first memories are about reading, not a huge shocker for an English teacher. But I remember when my sister and I were little, we had 2 twin beds in the same shared room. And when my mom would tuck us in at night, she would sit between our beds and she would read to us. And we went through whole books this way, whole series this way. And I remember Narnia, of course, was a classic. And I remember being so excited about this magical world on the other side of the wardrobe and all of the villains and heroes that came with it and the epic battles against good and evil went back and forth. But we also read all of the little House on the Prairie books. So all of the Laura Ingalls Wilder we got exposed to. I see some nods, so we recognize good old Laura and Paul. And that had its own magical world too. It wasn't a different one on another side of a wardrobe, but it was this America that was full of promise and full of potential. And I feel like in America right now, that's what we would like to get back to, is a place that is not full of polarity, but is full of that promise and potential. And we're not there right now. In a 2022 Pew study, researchers found after they interviewed people from 13 different major economies that every single country, respondents from every country, believed that things were worse now than they were before the pandemic. And at the top of that list sat the United States, with 88% of Americans saying that they believe things are worse now than they were in 2019 as far as the division goes in our country. And I believe personally and powerfully that literature has the power to change that it can spark and ignite conversations about issues that can heal our communities, which is why I believe book clubs can save the world. And I believe that because I believe that they are an avenue for us to gain empathy. And that empathy is what gives us the ability to see the people around us in the best possible light. So we can't afford any longer for reading to be just a luxury. It needs to be something that we prioritize and that we see as a path to cultural restoration. And there's 3 reasons why I feel that book clubs can save the world. And the first is about neutrality. So fictional characters are not going to be injured or offended by our judgment. Instead, they give us the option to project what our conflicts and what our doubts are onto this neutral space. And I feel like Edmund is a prime example of that in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe as a young kid, even now. I'm a little shocked and appalled that he chose to betray his family and align himself with a white witch for just the meager price of some Turkish delight. Like, what are you thinking, Edmund? But he wasn't bothered by my botheredness, so that's a powerful place to be able to practice that judgment. And on another note, similar, literature gives us the power to practice feeling. We can understand and practice things that are difficult without reliving our own personal traumas. And Arlene Hines, who was a nurse at St. Elizabeth's in DC for a long time, pioneered this idea of bibliotherapy. And what she would say is that when we talk about what we read, then we have the chance to agree to disagree. We can practice having our own feelings and our own positions, but we can also have the opportunity to look at someone else's and recognize the validation in someone else's opinions, which is really powerful as well. And Arlene Hines put it this way when she was talking about literature. She said that literature is the projection of our emotions, that it's a way for us to feel apart from ourselves. And that complexity, that big piece, is really something that leads to the second reason that we should read book clubs, we should be part of book clubs, is because of complexity. So when we read fiction, we get to introduce the characters and we get to feel their emotions and their thoughts, and we get their personal histories and their thought processes, and that's certainly not something that we have the opportunity to gain from our neighbors and our social media rivals. And I think the power there is that we need to see people not just as villains, but we need to be able to see them outside of the black and white, outside of the right and wrong. And last summer, I ran across a study from the combined academic powers of students at Princeton and the University of Florida and the University of Virginia, and they found that Americans, especially young Americans, who read literary fiction, especially short stories, recognize that the world is complex, and they understand that people are multifaceted, and that our inequalities don't define us, which is extremely powerful to be able to get to that point. And Peggy Heller, who wrote a book about poetry therapy, it's a memoir, she recognized that same power of metaphorical language, and she said that metaphorical language recognizes our complexity, it honors our complexity. And that's because it has both feeling and meaning. It has the content and the process, and it also has the what and the how. And that what, that how is what leads us to the last reason that book clubs can save the world, and that is about agency. What we do with it, right? What we do with that what and how becomes that very important piece. And we want to do something, right? When we read, when we talk about what we read, we want to be able to take that to the next level and do something with it, to start to bridge these divides that we're feeling in America right now. And the British Library of Science found that when people read, they have an increased sense of autonomy. So they feel like they are empowered, that they make a difference. And even more, that same study found that people who talk about what they read have the opportunity to dig in and deal with things that are difficult. And instead of being overwhelmed and intimidated by those things, people who talk about what they read have the chance to feel determined. It gives them a sense of work. It gives them a sense of, hey, I can roll up my sleeves. We can start finding the solution in all these problems. We can start bridging the divide between people. And I feel like that's something that Laura Ingalls Wilder would understand. And one of the things I remember most about Little House in the Big Woods was when Pa came home with that maple sugar candy. And that was a revelation for Laura, not because the candy itself was particularly special, but because she understood the work that went into harvesting all of that syrup from all of those trees that her family had put months into. So it's that piece of work, that candy became a metaphor for the reward of work. And empathy is also hard work. And there were some faculty at George Washington University that recognized that their students were starting to lose a capacity for empathy because of the rise in the importance of efficiency. And those professors were concerned for their students. They thought, well, how can they be leaders that are both effective and efficient if they don't have empathy? So in 2018, all master's candidates in the public affairs school at George Washington University were required to take a course called Perspectives in Public Values. It was a book club. So these students had the opportunity to talk about 3 modern American novels, not because it mattered particularly what the literary merit of these books were, but because they brought forth issues that were really important for these public affairs students to be talking about. And those included gender and race and religion, immigration. It had to do with privilege and oppression and the relationship of an individual to the state. And I can think of nothing else that I would want our future public leaders to be discussing together than that. So, my mom has recently moved to the mountains, so she doesn't read to me every night anymore, which is kind of sad. But she is still a voracious reader. She sent me a text a couple weeks ago, and she said, "Rachel, I made a major literary landmark. I have read 500 books on my Kindle." And then she went on to tell me that the thing she misses most about living in the city is her book club. Not necessarily because she misses the people, but because she misses picking up books that she might not have chosen otherwise, because she misses the perspectives of people who don't necessarily share the same beliefs that she does. And Peggy Heller, good old Peggy Heller, would put it this way. She would say that when we read, we interpret the characters' actions as metaphors for our own experience, and we weep with them in delight or sadness. And that's what empathy is. And that's why book clubs can save the world, because we have the opportunity to see people, assume of people the very best. We need to see the world like Laura Ingalls Wilder, not like Edmund. Edmund just saw the world as this battle between good and evil, but it's more complicated than that. What we need to do is we need to see the United States and the people in it as full of potential and full of beauty and full of danger and wildness that we can capture and figure out how to share. So I would say go read, but don't do it alone. Gather up some of your coworkers or your classmates, see what the offerings are at the local public library, and join a book club. I'd recommend starting with a short story. Thank you.